Neighboring Japan and the US are poised to hold a summit next week at the White House, and the talks follow Russia's recent veto of international monitoring of UN sanctions against North Korea. So what are the implications of this latest veto? And given this recent development, what are some of South Korea's diplomatic priorities? Also, should Seoul seek to expand its support to Kyiv? Hope your work week is off to a good start. I'm Min Sunhee with Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Today we touch upon some of the diplomatic developments as we usher in the month of April. And for this, I have Professor Lim Eun-jung at Kongju National University live on the line. Professor Im, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
I also have Doctor Stephen Noerper at Asia Dialogue live on the line as well. Dr. Noerper, as always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Sunhee. Nice to be back and happy birthday.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Noerper. Perhaps, Dr. Noerper, we can start with a little bit about your thoughts. Now, Russia has vetoed monitoring of UN sanctions against North Korea. What would you say are the broader implications of this latest veto?
Well, this veto is incredibly important, Sunhee. This marks a real transition because it effectively eliminates the monitoring panel that has looked at North Korean violations. So this will essentially eliminate the panel of experts in late April. This panel of experts works at the United Nations. It has been in place for about 14 years. After the 2009 nuclear test, it was ratified. It has representatives from all of the Northeast Asia nations who participate and who monitor everything from nuclear to trade to crypto violations. And so it's very important in terms of keeping an eye on things. Russia's move is incredibly damaging because it robs us of that monitoring mechanism, and it will force the United States, South Korea, and Japan, as well as partners like Australia, to work much closer together. And so entities like the G7 will become incredibly important. That's not to say that the UN still isn't our main driver here, but it really weakens the UNSC. It weakens the ability to introduce and to enforce those types of sanctions that limit North Korean behavior in terms of nuclear development, and it shows Russia really at its worst, as strategically weak, as isolated, given the war in Ukraine and Western opinion against that, and it shows its reliance on another isolated entity, that of North Korea. So it's a very unhealthy development in the international arena, and it really hurts our operational ability forward.
Right, and staying with this very disturbing development then, Professor Im, Ukraine for its part claims that Russia's latest veto is a clear indication of its guilt with regard to its own weapons collusion with North Korea. What are your thoughts, Professor Im?
Well, first of all, I think I echo what Kyiv is that voice, because already some parts of the nuclear bomb, North Korea's that bombshells were found in the battlefield. So we already found a kind of evidence that shows there have been transactions between Russia and the North Korea. So in that sense, of course, Ukrainians accuse that kind of criticism, concern. I totally understand what they are trying to say, but at the same time, I'd like to present more like a broader context of this kind of agenda behavior. Again, Russia, as a member of the permanent members at the United Nations Security Council, this P5, so-called the P5 members, they are victors of World War II, which means they established this kind of institution, international organizations, to prevent any further massive killing in the human history. However, again, Russia violated those, spirit which was written the UN Charter, which is so tragic. And at the same time now, again, Russia, is a very responsible member of the United Nations Security Council. It need, again, the veto against this kind of resolution. resolution, which is another very, very disappointing moment. So I would love to, of course, I would love to more, responsible behavior of the Russia-like, superpower country who has gained a huge responsibility in the international organizations. But sadly, again, the reality is very different. So I wanted to mention that specific thing. Again, the bigger powers, legal and more ethical responsibility in the international organizations like the United Nations.
Right, ethical responsibility on the part of Russia then, Professor Lim Eun-jung. Dr. Noerper, moving forward then, Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, he recently requested for South Korea's Patriot missile defense system. Now, he pointed to the system's defensive nature and claimed that the supply of this particular system would not go against Seoul's stance against the supply of lethal weapons to Ukraine. How do you respond?
Oh, I think one is it's South Korea's decision on how they define that system and the appropriateness of that forward. That said, the Ukrainians need every bit of help they can get. And it really is in the interest of South Korea, as well as the United States and Europe, and their partners, to do as much as possible to help Ukraine. Really, any and all means necessary, and that may involve the introduction of defensive systems like the Patriots. Russia's missile capabilities, now enhanced through North Korea's KN-23s, are devastating to the Ukrainian people. So providing that support is essential. However, I would add, Sunhee, that it's important that we not just look at it in terms of military capabilities and trying to arm the area, but we also need to uptick diplomacy. And South Korea has a very important potential role there because it has dealt so much on the diplomatic front, and that we need all the members of the international community contributing to a resolution of this conflict and curtailing Russian aggression. So how does that work? Well, Russia is in the end, much more reliant on South Korea's economic benefits. Since the end of the Cold War, it has looked to South Korea for trade, for managerial expertise, for investment. Russians very much treasure South Korean consumer durables. And the quality that goes with those. They do not really, in the end, have a real interest in North Korea other than the political positioning. And so this suits Putin and the Kremlin's pursuit, which is crass, of trying to arm and fight against Ukraine. But South Korea really is the bigger fish in this. And so South Korea can option what have been historically strong relations with Russia and what it's meant in terms of its economic opportunity to pressure Russia. And so this is just one aspect, and the trilateral relationship of the United States and South Korea and Japan will be very important as well. But let's not lose sight of trying to push Russia to the negotiating table and trying to help Ukraine in any way possible, whether that's militarily, economically, diplomatically.
Right then, Professor Lim, keeping in mind what Dr. Noerper has just said, what do you believe should be Seoul's diplomatic priorities for the rest of this year? Keeping in mind, of course, the geopolitical tensions we face.
Sure. Again, South Korea now, it does have a seat as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, and our term is going to last until the end of next year, it's a 2-year term. And this year, specifically 2024, this is the very rare year for 3 countries, again, South Korea, Japan, and the United States. All the 3 countries sit together in the Security Council. This can be a rare chance. So I definitely want to emphasize the importance of the trilateral cooperation. But not just trilateral cooperation. In addition to this, again, we need understandings or deeper understandings from any other countries. For example, in the Global South country, and the South Korea-like country, we do share a similar historical background. We experienced imperial invasion, colonial rule, but, South Korea, obviously, we overcame that kind of very bitter past, and then we accomplished economic development. And we didn't, again, invade any other countries. So, morally too, ethically as well. well, South Korea can be closer, psychologically can be much closer to those countries who experienced similar bitter historical past. So global South country, how much they really can understand our position and our vision is, I will say, very, very much important. So I hope, again, that my government, I think my government already working very, very hard on the diplomacy with the countries of Global South. But I want to re-emphasize that. And again, in addition to the third, again, the European countries too. As reporter already mentioned earlier, again, the NATO and the Korea-like countries, the cooperation is getting deeper and deeper. And, you know, this is not against somebody else. Rather, we want to share our common concerns and we want to be more coordinated. Again, this is not very much offensive. I don't think so. This is not an offensive behavior. This is more like, again, communicative behavior. So, again, the European countries, their understandings, their cooperation with them is important too, I think.
Right. And Dr. Noerper, expanding perhaps further on what both you and Professor Im have touched upon, there is, of course, much talk about the need for Seoul to assume a greater international role with responsibilities that reflect its high economic standing. Dr. Noerper, do you believe there is room for improvement with regards to Seoul's efforts to promote global interests?
Well, certainly, Sunhee, but I think that Seoul has been doing that very actively, and it has played a very strong hand in terms of disproportionately punching above its weight. It is very much considered, given the strength of its diplomatic efforts, the strength of its economy, and the strength of its democracy, a leader in the region and globally increasingly. So when we talk about entities like the G7, the extension of that to include South Korea is very important. When we look at the G20, South Korea has an important role. When we look at the United Nations Security Council, as Professor Im has said, very important that it sits yet again on the Security Council in a rotating seat, and really the first time that it has sat with Japan and the U.S. since 1997. South Korea will have the presidency for the month of June. That's important. And not insignificantly, Russia will have it the following month in July. So South Korea will have an opportunity to help set an agenda and to help move this forward. South Korea is very good on so many fronts in hosting the Green Climate Fund in South Korea, in participating actively in the United Nations, and in leading development concerns. Having been at the nexus of developing and developed countries, South Korea is uniquely qualified. So when we talk about Ukraine and we ask the question of what will happen in terms of post-war reconstruction and development, South Korea is an incredibly important player in that role. And not only is that for South Korea's diplomats to settle, but it will be in the interest of South Korea's business. And it shows the ability to incorporate South Korea's ingenuity, its adaptability, and the strength of what it can provide the international community. So when I teach my students, formerly at Columbia University, now at Hawaii Pacific University, one of the things they're most interested in beyond K-pop and culture and soft power is how South Korea has transformed itself as a diplomatic leader regionally and globally. And it will continue to do so with a very, very talented foreign ministry, regardless of which party is in control, one that has built South Korea into a mighty force in that regard.
Right, indeed. And staying with diplomacy, but perhaps moving beyond South Korea, Professor Im, neighboring Japan is hoping to host summit talks with North Korea. What, Professor Im, are the prospects of such a summit in your view?
Well, I think none of us will be very much against whatever there's dialogue between Tokyo and Pyongyang. If they can resume the dialogue, which will be, of course, positive for the regional peace. However, even though I hope there can be continuing, again, the conversations between Tokyo and Pyongyang, but to be very honest, again, I cannot be that much hopeful or optimistic at this specific moment, because Mostly because, again, there is a very deep perception gap between the Tokyo and Pyongyang, especially regarding the abductee issue. Numbers are different, and North Korea's Pyongyang's position is very stubborn. They said, like, this is settled issue, and as long as Tokyo wants to keep talking about this, we can't resume the dialogue with Tokyo. So Pyongyang's, again, the stance is very much stubborn. Whereas in Japan, this abductee issue is, how would you say, it's very much, there is no probably that much comparable issue with this specific issue. This is super, very sensitive and serious issue for any Japanese people. So none of probably Japanese politician can resume the dialogue without mentioning again this abductee issue. So that is why I can be very much hopeful or optimistic about the possibility of the dialogue between the two for now. However, again, I think as long as dialogue, conversations, negotiation can continue, I want to personally, I want to remain supportive for that kind of idea.
Right then, despite the uncertainty faced by Japan with regard to potential talks with North Korea, Dr. Noerper, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and US President Joe Biden will be holding talks, that is, at the White House next Wednesday. What looks to top their talks, Dr. Noerper?
Well, one is this historic announcement of upticking the security relationship to the strongest that it has ever been. And that really reflects a concern about China and where it's going, concerns about Russia, concerns about North Korea. And so that will involve a heightened engagement. It will probably involve much greater operational coordination. Right now, much of that is done from Hawaii to Japan. Of course, there are U.S. Forces in Japan, but the command in Japan may take on a heightened role. You may see elevated representation, and many of the decisions de facto may be made from Japan when it comes to U.S. commitments. So it will be a very important meeting in terms of the political significance. But it also very much involves South Korea, because it is this trilateral relationship which has strengthened since Camp David last year. And both Kishida and Biden on domestic levels need the support of one another. It's one of the reasons that Kishida was interested in talks with North Korea. He has an LDP vote in August. Biden, of course, has elections in November 2024. And so both want to project a strong bilateral relationship, and with South Korea, a strong trilateral relationship that promises peace and stability in Northeast Asia, especially given the concerns they have relative to China, to Russia, and to North Korea.
Right, so this sense of solidarity, of course, will be very important then. Dr. Noerper, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Im, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha.
Right, well, that ends Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.